Hey folks, how's everyone doing? Welcome to the stream. This is Diagnose Your Chess, episode 4. Episode 4, episode 3. This is the third episode. And today I'm actually joined by special guest Andrew Post. Andrew is mainly an online player, but he and I go way back. We've known each other for many years. We actually went to college together and have kept in touch since then. So we don't know each other from the chess world, but I guess recently kind of came in contact again through chess because Andrew's been like watching a lot of the streams and I guess doing more chess during the pandemic and stuff, like many people. And so here we are. Also, I know him as Post, so I'm just gonna be calling him Post. So how are you doing today? How's your chess been going lately?
It's going great. I'm on a little bit of a win streak, and I've really been enjoying taking chess more seriously in the last couple of months since I found your streams.
Cool. And just to give people a sense of your level, I believe you haven't played any tournaments like over the board. Is that right?
That's right. I've done a couple of like chess camps where I've played some over the board games, but I've never gone to a tournament. I've never really played seriously over the board.
And so nowadays you mainly play on like Chess. Do you play on chess.com as well or mainly Chess?
I have an account on both. I play primarily on Chess, and when I want to try out a new opening, I'll do it on chess.com where I'm lower ranked.
Gotcha. And what time controls are you normally playing when it comes to Chess?
Um, I would say that the bulk of my experience this year was in Rapid and Bullet. I've probably
Rapid and
played,
Bullet.
yeah. Occasionally, I'd play some Blitz games too,
Mhm.
but the way I saw it, I was such a amateur player that I just needed to see a lot of positions to develop a feel.
Mhm.
So I started off playing a couple of thousand bullet games, sprinkling in a couple of rapid games to apply what I learned until just about a month ago.
Oh, okay. And then what happened a month ago?
Um, a month ago, I found your Patreon, your Discord
Oh,
server, and I decided, you know what, I want to try and play some classical games. I think I'm ready to actually try and study.
cool. Yeah, a lot of people will say that like Bullet isn't super helpful for your chess, and I think it really isn't just because it forces you to play so fast that you're like hardly well, you're basically just not thinking about your moves. So it's all about
Right.
like your instincts and reaction times. Which I
Mm.
mean, it's like a fun game, but I feel like yeah, so different from even just like Blitz and Rapid Chess, where it's going to be more about like the actual ideas that go on the board and stuff. So I'm glad you pulled away from Bullet. I would encourage you to just play like as little Bullet as possible, or just to treat Bullet as a completely separate game where you're trying to flag your opponent, and
Right.
that's like 50% of the goal. And there's a question actually from the chat from El Ignorante. Is it okay if I only play like rapid games? Yeah, I think for as far as chess improvement goes, like rapid is kind of the sweet spot because it doesn't take that long to play a game. It's not like you're sitting there for hours and hours, but you still have time to like consider your moves and then learn something. And what's your latest rapid rating? Just give us an estimate here.
I'm just breaking into the 1500s in Rapid.
Okay, cool. And I saw your classical was at like 1500 as well, or is that still like provisional? Have you only played just a couple
It's
games?
it's still provisional. I think I've played only four or five.
Gotcha. Um, okay, cool. So yeah, we have a couple of your games loaded here. We're gonna take a look at them shortly. I also wanted to ask you, like, do you do anything nowadays to work on your chess, like solving puzzles or watching videos, courses, anything like that?
Uh, I really do like chess puzzles. I'd say that I've probably had a casual interest in chess puzzles and trying to calculate out 3 or 4 move tactics for years. Just, every month or two, pick them up, spend an hour or two doing some puzzles.
Hmm.
Um, Actually, playing chess itself was daunting to me because of trying to memorize openings and chess theory. Um, but I've enjoyed chess puzzles. I still do uh, puzzles on chess.com, Lee Chess. There's an app I got on my phone, CT Art might
CT
be its
art.
name,
Hmm.
um, which I've been using for puzzles more during pandemic.
Nice. And how often are you working on solving?
I'd say I probably do 5 to 10 puzzles a day, just part of my morning routine.
Okay, great. And then, well, before the stream, we were talking a bit about stuff you watch, but you mentioned that you will watch Twitch quite frequently when it comes to chess.
Yeah, yeah. I've been a fan of Twitch for a while, and I feel like chess has really taken off this year on Twitch.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so just any time of day I've got some downtime, I'll see if uh, Gotham Chess or I Am Rosen or Ben Feingold or someone is just giving these really wonderful, funny, entertaining lectures on positions and ideas. So I'm probably watching about an hour a day of that.
Very cool. Yeah, I always thought watching, I mean, when I was like improving myself, it was really, there was no Twitch. It was more just kind of like planned chess commentary. So there would be some kind of high level event going on and usually two people like discussing the game. So I learned a lot just watching GMs talk about the position at hand and just exploring all their thoughts. But now on Twitch, yeah, you have such a variety of stuff. You can literally log on any time of day, 24/7, and there'll be an IM or a GM streaming.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, they do different stuff. It's not always like super instructive. Sometimes they're just like playing blitz, but usually there is something to take away from it, even if all you're doing is just like watching them play and then trying to guess their moves before they play them.
Right.
And then trying to understand like, okay, why did they make some other move? So I think that alone is already going to be helpful. So that's really cool that you're doing that. And
Thanks.
then, are you reading any chess books?
Um, at the moment, I'm not. There were 2 chess books that you gave me as I think maybe birthday present 3 or 4 years ago.
Uh-huh.
Um, One of them was on the Caro Khan, and uh, it was just an introductory book to the Caro Khan. The other one was on the King's Indian.
Mm.
So I've picked those back up again recently. Um, Otherwise, I'm planning to buy for myself. Uh, well, I guess after today's conversation about what I need, I was planning to pick up a couple of the books on one of your YouTube videos for book recommendations. The Soviet Chess Primer
Mm.
stuck in my head as being a pretty good choice.
Nice. Yeah, I think yeah, that's a really great book for like fundamentals. I would probably recommend that one. Yeah, just kind of like blanket to like most players, like under 1500. I think that yeah, it has just like a ton of like good quality foundational stuff in there.
Mhm.
Um, well, sweet. So let's get into it. Let's talk about some of your games here. We wanted to start with this one. So this is a game you're playing white here. Your opponent is also just around 1500, a little bit higher rated. And this was a classical game, is that right?
Yes.
I think
Yes,
you
this would have
mentioned
been a 30 plus 20, I think.
30 plus 20. Cool. Okay, so here we go. You're playing the London system. And yeah, I guess my first question is, did you learn this from like a specific source? I know Eric is a big guy in the London.
So Eric talked about the system a lot, and I think I picked up this specific variant that I'm going to play from Gotham Chess.
Hmm.
Um, it's a combination that I've seen him play uh, several times. I think it also came up in his speed run video where he talked about how to get out of 12 to 1400.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't understand some of the theory for why this line would be better than other variants of London, but I've probably played uh, hundreds of games of it in Bullet and dozens of games of it in Rapid, and it hasn't felt hard to get into the middle game with.
Cool. Yeah, the London is, it can be like kind of um, controversial. There's really mixed feelings about it, but I think you fall into one of the few use cases for whom it makes a lot of sense because it allows you to just get your pieces out very safely. It has like a very solid like positional foundation in the sense that you're fighting from the center right from the opening, which basically all major openings try to do. Yeah, you develop all your pieces to normal squares. I mean, the main drawback is that it's not considered as like an ambitious of an opening for white.
Right.
So that's why I don't like. I would never want to teach this to a kid learning chess because when kids are growing, they're like developing really quickly, and you can just fill their head with information. And so they, I think, should just start with 1e4 and fall for all of the traps at least once, but over time they'll learn how to play this very open game, this very like dynamic attacking game. But for people that just like want to like enjoy chess and like have something to start out with, then like the London is a great choice. Eventually you might want to like move away from it if you get tired of it, but if not, I would say just keep playing it. But the important thing is that like you have to always be ready to like analyze the opening and be willing to play it in like a different way. So here actually is already a good example of that. You play this move c4. Whereas most
Yes.
London players, they usually put the pawn on c3 in like 90% of cases.
Right.
So yeah, why play c4? I mean, it's a good move, but I'm just trying to get your thoughts on it.
Sure. Um, so the the main reason why I like C4 is because I do, whenever it feels safe to do, like to get my knight to C3 and then bring my rook to C1. It commits me to castling kingside, but it's a deviation from the main line fairly early on that I expect I have more experience with than my opponents do.
Gotcha. So yeah, Vishnu is calling me out in the chat because I usually rail against London. But I gotta make a really important distinction here. So I made a video for Dojo a while ago, and it's called, I think it's called like either, I think it's called The Real Problem with the London. But the point was not that the opening itself is not great. The problem is that usually when players choose this opening, they're coming in with this mindset that like you can just play one solid opening that's good against everything and then you're fine. And then that's really not the case because like in the opening you have to be very willing to react to what your opponent is doing because they might be playing on the queen side, might be playing on the king side, they might be playing super fast and loose with their pawns. I mean, there are so many different things they can do to you in the opening. It's a crime against chess, I guess, is the argument to just do the same structure over and over again and not think about what the opponent is playing.
Yes.
But if you're willing to play the London in different ways and you're willing to like explore different ideas and like you're willing to play c4 not c3, like you're willing to experiment with different setups, then it's just like as good as opening as any. So it's really like the mindset that I have an issue with when players, they just want to play like the same thing over and over and over again, because then like okay, either your opening works out for you or it doesn't, but you don't really have any middle game knowledge to work with. Whereas for you, you're going to be studying different positions hopefully in the middle game. you'll get more experience and you'll get more growth in terms of understanding what to do after the opening. So yeah, let's continue. So bishop d6, bishop g3, of course, takes, h5. Right. Weird move. What did you think of this one?
So I had never seen this move before. I'd been in the position just before h5 a few times. And I've won a number of rapid and blitz games through attacks on the h7 pawn if it's left alone and they don't play g6.
Right. Because you're always playing this one. And yeah, the pawn is under fire. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sometimes, depending on where Black's king knight ends up, sometimes I would play queen d3 instead of bishop f3. But yeah, combinations through d3 attacking h7 work well for me. So my first reaction when I saw this move was, okay, he's trying to stop that. He's seen that before. He knows that this pawn can be a weakness in his position. I'm more used to seeing people just play g6. So I was wondering, why would you play this instead of g6?
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, well, maybe this is trying to do a pawn rush. Maybe he's just trying to take up a lot of space on my king side. I also suspected that he was kind of committing to trading off his knight on g4 or his bishop on g4 for my knight on f3 at some point, just because it felt like he was taking away some important retreat squares for his bishop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's important to recognize that. Yeah, now that h5 is on the board, like bishop on g4 might feel a little bit stuck and is probably gonna exchange at some point. People are asking if this is like a weird Eric Rosen trap. No, no, h5 is not a good move. I just wanted to see what Post was thinking about it, because like, I mean, reacting to odd moves in the opening is something that's gonna happen quite a bit at this level. Because I was doing this like speed run recently, and yeah, people are playing all kinds of random moves in the opening, and a lot of these like rook pawn moves are often just bad because they take the place of a developing move. For sure, Black should develop with like a move like knight f6 here, and the position is solid. I would say White is quite comfortable, but so is Black. There is a weird trap in the London. I guess I'll show folks so that they don't get caught with it. Someone was mentioning any h5 traps from Rosen. Yeah, he likes this one, I think. h5 in this position.
Wow.
Which is, it actually is quite devious, because if you go e3, aka the London move, then Black has e5.
And he's going to trap my bishop.
Yeah, exactly. The point is that the queen is opened up onto the g5 square, so he wants to go g5 if we take g5 and h4. I mean, Black has to compromise his whole structure, but a piece is a piece, so it's just like already winning for Black. And if bishop takes, then we just have f6 in the same trajectory for the bishop. So yeah, watch out for that one. That one, that's definitely a real trap. My guess is White can probably just go like knight f3 and you're fine. But this is exactly the kind of trap that does catch a lot of London players that are used to just like pre-moving their opening. So yeah, but in the game, okay, White definitely doesn't have to worry about any of that. I think you just get a very comfortable position. So knight c3, it makes total sense. And now g5. So what did you think about this one?
So I'm trying to ignore the evaluation bar on the left. I remember being worried that this seemed like a very confident attack. I think he also played it fairly quickly. So I remember thinking, uh-oh, what's the attack here? You know, how familiar is this position to my opponent?
Hmm.
I assumed that the ultimate target somehow would be my rook, that attacking this pawn structure, I'm maybe not going to have enough time to get both my bishop and my king out of the way and protect the rook with a queen or anything. The rook is undefended. So I went looking to see how how is this going to mature into an actual attack.
Mm-hmm.
So I did a lot of, I think, probably wasteful calculation of how does he get to a place where he brings another piece in, or he's connected his queen to his rook so that when he opens up the H file, I don't just take his rook first. And I couldn't find a plan. I wasn't able to figure out what the goal was. So I remembered something that Daniel Naroditsky says a lot, which is when you're surprised by a move you don't understand, try to just stick to your plan. Hope that your plan is better. Do a normal thing.
That's good advice. So queen b3. Great move. Probably one of the best in the position by far. Just attacking b7. And it's actually a typical idea to try to exploit the fact that black developed the bishop early, the light square bishop. Because they leave b7 undefended, and white just has this very natural queen move to attack it. So a typical theme whenever you start with the queen pawn. Okay, now black decided to take on f3. They could have also played a move like knight a5, where usually the idea is that you get hit with tempo, but you can respond with tempo as well. So we have queen a4 check, we hit the knight, black should probably go c6 here, and that defends the knight on a5. But this knight on a5 is not really so great, so white still keeps this kind of nice initiative, and you have a lot of moves here. You can go like knight d2, for example, or knight e5 might be more active just because it hits the bishop as well as kind of activating the knight and hitting the c-pawn. I think that's maybe what black should have done, but okay, they take on f3, gf, h4, and based on what you were saying that you were looking for a way for them to open the h file, but when the rook is defended.
Right.
So I'm guessing you saw that there's still no threat with this move.
Yeah, it seemed premature to me. I would have expected the knight to move, maybe the king to castle queen side before this sort of play on my king side, on the king side.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so takes on b7, absolutely. Knight e7. Knight b5. That goes king d7. Yeah, I mean, it looks a little weird to defend with the king, but on the other hand, like, technically black does have a lot of pieces around the king, so it's not... White should be doing really well here, probably winning, but it's not, like, super easy to break through. Okay, but you take e d5 and bishop h3. Well, that's pretty killer. Probably black should have taken with the knight, seems like, to keep this diagonal closed. And then I know you have the the engine down there. You can actually turn that one off by clicking the arrow on kind of like the top right of it. But do you remember if you had something in mind here during the game, or was your
Yeah.
idea to take on d5 and see how they respond? Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Um, so before I played a couple of moves earlier, before I played knight to b5,
Mm-hmm.
I was really excited by the possibility of capturing on c7, forking the king and the rook.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was surprised by the king coming to d7 to defend that pawn. And I remember thinking in that position, can I force the knight on c6 away, or can I force the king to have to retreat back away and then be able to do that fork again in the future?
Mm-hmm.
So my thinking was, if I took if CD and then knight captures d5, then it looked to me like the knight on the c file was hanging, and I could capture it with my queen in this position. With the king on d7, then I could at least pin the knight, and it would be undefended, and I might find another way to apply pressure. I'm worried my
Uh-huh.
board is out of sync with what you're seeing.
Oh no, it's okay. Wait, do you have the position after knight ge7 or different way?
Yes. Yeah, I have knight to e7.
Oh, okay, yeah, we're here. So
Okay,
I wasn't clear. Were you talking about taking on d5 in this position or after, specifically after knight b5?
after.
Oh,
I
after,
was
gotcha.
surprised when I played that move. I expected the king to go to f8
Mm-hmm.
instead of to d7. I didn't notice d7 as an option.
Yeah, surprising move, but actually, I mean, I think objectively it is a good one because the king can help defend things.
Mhm.
So as long as the lines don't immediately open up, then the king can sometimes survive. But that's a big if. Um,
One
so
other idea I had
yeah.
here was, um, I'm very used to playing rook to c1 at some
Hmm.
point during the early middle game. So I thought opening the c file would let me put some more pressure on the knight on c6 with my rook.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. No, I like what you did here, and okay, definitely Black would have or should have taken like this, and well, I'm guessing you continue Rook C1 here, just to attack everything on the C file, and yeah, I mean looks really nice. I mean this was well played game. It feels like.
Thank you. I was expecting at some point for him to play rook to b8 and just
Mm-hmm.
force my queen out.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept being surprised every move that he didn't play that.
Well, but let's see if you even gave him a chance. You took on B7, so knight on C6 is hanging with check. He has to defend that. Then knight b5, the c7 pawn is hanging with check. We could explore this one. Let's say rook b8, because if we take on c7 in this position with the knight, well then after the king moves away, it's hard to find our next move because our queen is hanging and our knight is hanging as well. It doesn't seem like we can keep every. So this you could run into trouble here, but I guess you can just take on c7 with the queen
Interesting.
and win a pawn this way. It's not the biggest advantage, but you win the pawn. In fact, this might have been Black's kind of like best practical chance because at least he gets to go into the endgame. He's down material, but his king is not getting mated, and it would still take a lot of work for White to convert this one. But okay, from Black's point of view, we can kind of understand. Like Rook B8 is a pretty hard move to find because he sees that the pawn is hanging with check. So there's this kind of assumption. Well, I have to just defend the pawn. A faulty assumption, but a natural one. And then after King D7, you took on D5. So now the knight on C6 is again hanging with check. So again, Black just doesn't have time to go Rook B8.
Right.
He played ED5, Bishop H3 check, again with tempo. So, I mean, yeah, I guess maybe you didn't quite realize this, but I feel like the reason your attack is like well played is because every move comes with tempo. This is very important. Like Queen B3 comes with a threat, and then Queen B7 also comes with a threat. It's not just about taking the pawn, and then Knight B5, CD5, Bishop H3. Okay, then here Black kind of collapses with King E8, and you take on C7, and yeah, another forcing move, another check.
Right.
Definitely he should have gone F5.
I expected, I was expecting F5 here. I was also worried about G4.
Oh, interesting. How come?
Um, in part, I noticed it before F5, so I just started calculating on it as a way to interpose.
Mm.
And my concern with, I guess, G4, I take, then F5, and now my bishop is out of place and has to retreat back to H3
Right.
instead of, if you just played F5, my bishop is better placed and I can bring it back to F1.
Mm. Oh, so you don't like your bishop on H3?
No, I didn't.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I think this is a bit of a leak because your bishop is actually very good on H3. It's a really strong piece, mainly just because it's pointed at the king, and it's also, well, after F5, it's pointed at a potentially weak pawn that you can maybe target. Just for example, when you play Rook C1 here, you're already threatening kind of a nice tactic to take on F5, because this knight is now defending like two things. So you can take on F5, distract the knight, and then take on C6, and Black's king is getting busted. So your bishop is good. It's more if, let's say, Black took this G pawn and then put it on G6. Then the bishop would be potentially bad, because it's
Sure.
kind of biting into a square that's being protected by a pawn. So that's kind of the thing about bishops. If you're pointed at something that like you're tying your opponent's pieces down to, in this case the knight, then that's always good because it means your bishop is active and the knight is passive, and you're putting pressure. And the way you kind of get to a winning combination is when enough of your pieces are putting pressure that something breaks through, something tactical. But if Black has pawns that can just block and blunt your bishop, then yeah, you would want to think about either rerouting the bishop, or more likely you would need what we would call a pawn break with a move like E4, where you just try to trade off some pawns so you can free the diagonal for your bishop and force your bishop to start working. Is that a term you've heard so far, pawn break?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Nice.
I learned just yesterday the definition of outpost, and probably 2 days ago the definition of pawn break. So
Awesome.
recent knowledge.
Yeah. Wow, that's cool. Where did you hear those terms?
I think they came up on the St. Louis Chess Club Twitch stream.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
There was, usually they're just solving puzzles, but there was a lesson by I can't remember her name now, but a female master.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, they can do some really instructive stuff. So, yeah, actually, this whole sequence is really interesting because, I mean, F5 is, I would say, like the natural move because you just block the check. Then White has a lot of options, like E4 is interesting, and just trying to like open up the position. But as you pointed out, G4 is actually stronger, giving up this pawn. But the reason that it's stronger, I think, is maybe not so clear. So it's not so much that, well, your bishop is on h3, it's more just that black got a big tempo. Because after f5, it's white to play, and you can do something here, attacking like rook c1 or e4 or what have you. But if black gives this pawn and then forces you to take and then gets f5, then they kind of get the drop on your bishop. You have to spend this move going back. And now black finally has time for some kind of move like a rook b8, like some kind of breather to actually start fighting back and defending their position. And then black might actually be okay here. Who knows? Because white's pieces are a little bit scattered, and queen a6, the rook comes to b6 and kind of kicks us out. So just like that, actually, the tide of the attack can change. It's really interesting, and it all swings on this one tempo that can actually be extremely valuable. It is actually very surprising to me that black can even survive here, but that's chess. Sometimes
it did look good for me.
Yeah, I know the engine doesn't like bishop h3 check, but I would never blame you for making this move. Anyone, really. It just looks so like such an obvious idea that, yeah, to my eyes, it's a perfectly reasonable move. Okay, then black kind of blows it with king to e8, because now you just take on c7. Then you take with the queen, so forcing the queen trade. And knight b4. All right, let's see your technique here. Castles. Great. Just get your rooks out and win the game. Rook c1, knight c7. Yeah. Trade that one. Yeah, super solid technique here.
Thank you.
And I know, actually, I saw this finish earlier, but this is actually a nice litmus test that I use to see if, like, because you have a mate here that it seems like you set up intentionally with f3. Nice. So you saw this one coming. Yeah, because a lot of players, they just they don't know how to checkmate without a queen, so they got to make the queen first and then set it up. But this is good that you are willing to use your other pieces too to deliver mate. It's a good sign.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to another game. You mentioned you also wanted to look over the game you just played like an hour ago.
Yes, I've never seen this opening before. I was very thrown off.
Okay, let's take a look. And do you remember what was your opponent's username? Was it the Fabio game?
I believe it was. It was, yeah, Fabio 12345.
Okay. All right, so you're playing black here. He goes e3. Then e5, e4. Fascinating.
Yeah. It's like he wanted to play black.
Right. So you do understand the opening.
I mean, I understood why he might want to play it. I'm not an E4 player, I guess, which is kind of what this is mirroring.
Gotcha.
So I was immediately worried, oh God, he knows this position so much better than I do that he's willing to play black mirrored to get it.
Yeah, that's so funny. It makes no sense because the point of playing reverse openings, as you said, is because you do know it better, right? You play it from black side. But the point of playing them is that when you play them with white, typically you get that extra tempo because you move first. So yeah, he could, if he wanted this position, play e4. And well, do you play e5 here, or I think you mentioned the Caro?
I would play the Caro.
Okay, gotcha. So you're a Caro-Kann player. All right, so he, against most players, could just play e4, e5, and then he gets his favorite opening with the tempo up, because he also, I guess, plays it with black. So instead what he does, he goes e3, sees what you do. Now, I like that you played e5 here. I mean, as a Karo Khan player, you could have also done d5 or c6. But actually, I should be clear here. You against d4, you mentioned. Are you playing something here?
So I've just recently been trying to train up on the King's Indian
Okay,
defense.
cool.
Because what I was playing before against d4 was d5 and then trying to get into a mirror London setup.
Gotcha, gotcha. Which is hard because now you're
Down
down
a
one
tempo.
move. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can't quite get it. Okay, so King's Indian is a decent opening. Actually one of the best things about it is that you can basically play it against anything except for one e4. Because if you try to
Right.
play it here, you get hit with this early e5, and we just have a whole different opening. This is known as the Alekhine defense. But so against e3 and actually basically any other move, you can just default to a King's Indian setup. Because the
Okay.
worst thing that white can really do to you here is just play d4. And so you would just be in a normal d4 opening where your opponent played e3 kind of early, which, as you can imagine, is not really such a challenging move because it blocks the bishop early on, doesn't fight for as much space as white could be fighting for, and basically you get a good King's Indian here.
Mhm.
That's what a lot of players like about it, myself included, is that you can play it against c4, you can play it against knight f3. You don't really have to bother yourself with learning all these like different move orders because your setup is essentially the same, and that's what makes it a very like flexible and friendly opening.
Mm.
Okay, now you get this, which is yeah, funny because I mean yeah, basically he said he gives you this position, and now you're playing white essentially.
Right.
Um, well, okay, what to do? So you start developing your pieces. Absolutely fine. Knight e7. Yeah, definitely knight f6 here is would be considered more to the point because you attack the e4 pawn as well as hitting the d5 square. So it's a little bit more active than putting the knight on e7.
Mm.
And if white tries to hit you with like knight g5, which is often quite scary, well, if you can just castle here, then you're never worried about this because f7 is defended. And if white wants to give up two minor pieces for the rook, you should happily go into this because your minor pieces are out and about and very strong in the middle game.
Mm.
Let's see what happens. So bishop c4. Wow, and the guy plays okay, it's not quite the Jerome Gambit. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Never mind. It's a different opening that's similar, but he takes here knight g5. Okay, this is just a sacrifice. And how did you feel about this one? Were you worried here?
As soon as he sacrificed his bishop, I assumed that he was going to then start trying to check me with his knight and his
Mm-hmm.
queen. And this is the highest rated opponent I've played, so I assumed he knew what he was doing.
Okay.
Especially after that weird opening.
Right.
So I definitely felt like I was already falling into a trap.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I guess that's what happens. I mean, you just don't have a lot of experience, so right, you don't really know like what you're getting into. Opponent is playing confidently and maybe quickly. But on the other hand, if you just try to evaluate the position with your own two eyes, one thing to always look for is like how many pieces are in the game and actually working in the position.
Yeah, the position seems great to me.
Right.
The one thing that I definitely did in this position and the position after it was I just covered up the queen side of the board. I'm much more developed on the queen side, but I was worried if there's a fast combination coming, maybe that won't matter.
Hmm.
The knight and the bishop on the c file might both be kind of blocked by my knight and pawn on the e file. I was worried that I wouldn't be able to use that piece activity if there's a quick combination coming.
I gotcha. Yeah, sometimes that can that can happen. Though, yeah, it definitely doesn't seem like this should be anything for white, because it's like, in terms of the logic of chess, if we kind of like replay what's happened in the game, white lost the tempo in the opening, right? Moved the e pawn twice to give you a free move, and then sacrifices like one of two developed pieces in a position where you now have like three pieces out. So it's like, basically, yeah, if chess is a balanced game, then this should never work.
Right,
But at the same time, okay, he does play queen f3. He has this threat, and yeah, now we have to defend.
right. And
Um,
I thought about this position probably the longest in the whole game.
oh, interesting. Okay,
Um,
yeah, go ahead.
so I very quickly found the mate threat.
Right.
And I started trying to think through the different ways that I had to defend it. And the most obvious one was rook f8.
Right.
And then I would have assumed that he would play queen h5.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's got a good attack on h7. And I'm in check again, so I'm going to have to interpose my rook. I assumed on f7,
Mm.
and then he's going to, or I could play g6,
Mm-hmm.
and either way he would capture on h7. And at that point, I was kind of stretching my comfort calculating. I saw that I had a check that I could take on f2,
Mm-hmm.
and I couldn't tell if that would be overextending or buying me tempo to get out of it.
Right.
That felt like the sharper position.
Gotcha. Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's an interesting moment. Definitely a really interesting decision, because, well, defense is hard. I think it's one of the most difficult things in chess, and I feel like, yeah, you kind of run into a typical struggle here where nothing really looks clear, but you still have to choose something. Um, so okay, a couple things to clear up. So on queen h5, we got to be very careful not to go rook f7, because white owns this square. So white just
Right.
mates us. So g6 would definitely be the move. We can think about knight g6 as well. But g6 would kind of be the instinct because we block with tempo. And like in the other game, every tempo counts in the attack. So if your opponent is forced to spend a move just moving their queen and you can get another piece out, then that's usually going to be good for you. So what you were saying is you were expecting g6 here, queen takes h7, and then maybe you have bishop takes f2, maybe you don't, but ultimately you just didn't know what to make of this position.
Right. I was worried that I was worried that this position was alluring, but I'd miss some fundamental flaw.
Mm. And well,
The
alluring
fact that,
in what
sorry, go ahead.
sense?
Well, I'm up. He made that sacrifice, and so far the only compensation he's gotten is a pawn. I'm
Okay,
better
good.
developed. I liked the position, but since it was all in my head, I wasn't confident that I wasn't missing some attack in this position, some check, some hanging piece.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I just want to make sure we're on the same page because you are up material. White sacrificed a bishop for looks like two pawns now because they took one on f7, they took one on h7.
Right.
But yeah, the real question is mainly just like, are you getting mated? Obviously, if you're getting mated, that's a position we want to avoid. And if you're not getting mated, then there's a good chance you're just going to be up the piece, and that's like a decisive advantage. I think like if everything is under control and your king is safe, you develop simply, you get your piece out, and like yeah, it's very hard to for the opponent to come back from that.
Mhm.
So yeah, then the question is the evaluation. So let's take a look at what you did in the game. I know you gave the piece, but this is not a blunder so much as just like a decision because you wanted queen f6.
Yes. I was trying to. My assumption in all of this was my opponent must know better. If he's made a sacrifice and I can give a piece back and force some trades to get out of it, maybe that's the best that I'm supposed to be able to do. Maybe that seemed more plausible that a player at this level would have a gambit that I could either get checkmated or end up close to equal again.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, what can I say? It's not like there are no like hard and fast rules for this, but yeah, allow me to give you permission to not trust your opponents, so heavily, like not giving them this much respect.
Mm.
I mean, you should have a sense of danger, and there is. You could make the exact opposite mistake where your opponent is giving you material and you're just taking it like, oh, my lucky day, not really thinking about what's the idea. That's kind of on the opposite end of this balance. And that's definitely a big mistake as well. You should be, basically, you should be strong manning the opponent. You should be trying to figure out what's their best move, what's their follow-up, what's their idea here. And then more importantly, actually just trying to treat the position objectively.
Mm.
So what I mean by that is like if you don't see a way that you're losing, then in your mind you're not losing. So that you're always going to have thoughts of like, oh, maybe they have some trick or maybe they have some tactic, but unless you see like exactly what it is, if you're up a piece, then your evaluation for that position should be that you're good, you're doing well.
I'm seeing ghosts.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, there might be some positions where, for instance, you see options for the opponent, and then you're just not sure. So let's just take a quick different example. Let's say White played this one a little bit slower. We played here, knight c3, castles. Let's say you have a lot of good moves here. Let's just say you play this move a6, which I think might not be the best move, and White goes bishop g5.
Okay.
Then let's say you push h6, White goes back, bishop h4, and now in this position you're thinking about this move g5.
Right.
Now normally it's not great to push pawns in front of the king, but let's just say you have some reason for doing so. But then you're worried, rightly worried, about White potentially sacrificing on g5 and opening up your king, getting 2 pawns for the piece. So this is what you would be calculating. g5 takes, bishop takes. And then
Right.
during the game, you don't know what the evaluation here is. You, again, might be up a piece. You might just be getting mated. But then the way you would try to approach this one is we just try to figure out, like, what can White really do to you here? And then you might see ideas like, well, there's maybe knight d5 coming and attacking the pin, trying to get the knight to f6. Maybe there's queen f3, queen g3. Maybe the king moves over to h1 and then White pushes the f pawn. The more you look at this position, the more ideas you find for your opponent.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an example of something that would look very scary to me and a lot of other players. But even if you don't exactly 100% see like where the mate is, you can kind of tell that, well, my opponent has a bunch of different attacking moves and a bunch of ways of strengthening their position. So yeah, there's a lot of potential problems for me here. So you don't necessarily have to see exactly like move by move how you're going to lose the game. But if the position looks like the opponent has a lot of threats and a lot of ideas, then that's a position to avoid.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the position we were thinking about, so queen f3, rook f8, queen h5, g6, queen takes h7. Here, there's not as many ideas that white has. The main difference is that white here only has like kind of two pieces in the attack. Nothing else is really developed. And it's even hard to come up with moves. Just looking at it, I think like, okay, maybe h4, h5 could be a plan for white, like opening up the rook and trying to open up more lines against the king. You can definitely try to just develop the knight, like knight c3, knight d5, but this is already feeling automatically a lot slower. So here, this fear is more about like the opponent just being a really tricky player and having some trick versus, you know, concrete happenings in the position, actual moves that you would be concerned about.
Mm-hmm.
So as much as I can, I would encourage you to basically, you know, like, I guess there's this phrase, trust but verify. Like, trust that your opponent has some kind of point and some idea to what they're doing, but verify their ideas with your own analysis. And so if you see that like rook f8, you're up a piece and there are no immediate threats, you should trust in the logic of the game and trust that once you get to this position, then you'll be able to figure it out. You might not be able to see from afar because you're calculating several moves ahead, like exactly what you're going to do and whether bishop takes f2 is good or not. But the idea is that you're anticipating this position, believing that it's going to be good for you, and then once you get here, you're just kind of trusting that you should have a move. So that's what we kind of refer to as like evaluating a position. Just like assessing it and believing in that assessment. So once I get here, maybe my opponent will have some move I didn't expect, but I believe that my position is resilient enough that I'll have a defense. And then once you're there, it's much easier to find it when you're just looking at the position over the board compared to your visualization.
That's an interesting thought. I like the idea that if I'm going to do all of this calculation and then not believe myself, it was a waste of time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I didn't even go that far, but that is kind of like, I guess, something to think about, right? The longer you think about some critical line, well, the more you're invested in it, and you should be more likely to play it.
Mm-hmm.
That said, I mean, this felt like a very critical moment, so I definitely don't blame you for spending time here. But right, if you don't see a real issue with what you think is the kind of obvious or critical move, then I would say play this one. And if it turns out, you know, your opponent has some miracle attack and finds a way to win, I mean, it just means your evaluation of the position was wrong. But that's still going to be useful for you in the long run in terms of your chess understanding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's more to learn that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, we don't want to shy away from complications if we think that they're going to work out in our favor. And it only gets harder, to be honest. I mean, like, I mean, I'll tell you, your opponent here is not that high rated, and players up to like 2,000 or so will make really bad mistakes, you know, hanging pieces and stuff. And it might seem like they have some follow up, but the reality is that everyone blunders, everyone makes mistakes. I mean, players up to 2,000, I say will do this frequently, but basically any player can hang something in any one particular game. And it's actually, it is very important to have that confidence. Like, if your opponent has blundered something, to have the courage to take it, you know, and basically, because you're kind of like walking into something, but you're essentially calling their bluff. Okay, so queen f5, queen f6. We force the endgame. It's a very practical decision in the sense that, yeah, now definitely your king is safe and you have no issues here. But of course, maybe we could have had a much larger advantage if we held on to the piece.
Right.
Okay, let's continue. So d6, d3. Now we just get like normal position. F5. So what was the idea here? Why f5 and not, let's say, some other move?
So I remember thinking here that my eye was drawn to playing either knight b4 or knight d4, threatening the fork on c2, but that he would just castle away. And I would still get. Oh, sorry, that's not accurate. that I wouldn't be able to get the fork because he could castle away. But then I started thinking about, well, does he have a better move because he's still leaving c2 hanging?
Yeah. And rook would be trapped.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So that was still attractive to me. Then I thought, okay, well, he has some defenses for that. He's got knight a3. He's got doing some combination of moves to move the pawn, say c3 or c4. That would still leave the rook trapped. So then maybe he has to play a3 and So I went through a variety of options like that, and I thought, okay, if I play knight to one of those two positions, he's probably going to play knight a3.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think I also considered maybe he moves his king, or if I'm playing to d4, maybe he just trades my knight for his knight.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, knight d4, most likely white just trades. This is just the simplest solution, and then can continue from there. This isn't necessarily great for black because we just spent a move to trade pieces that are now off the board, and it's like we didn't really develop anything. And now white gets a tempo to develop something, so we're kind of like losing some time here. Yeah, knight b4, it's usually not the kind of move I would suggest because it does feel like a one-move attack, where like you attack the pawn, white will defend it. Now I think you pinpointed knight a3 is kind of a strict only move because the threat is not just to take, but to hop into c2 and win the rook. And any kind of king move, we're in an endgame, but there's still a lot of pieces on the board that white's king doesn't necessarily just want to be kind of floating in the center. And now you have a lot of moves like bishop g4, for example, just immediately being bothersome. Not to mention f2 pawn is also hanging, so maybe we can even think about taking this one. So white would have to go knight a3, and then the real question is like, is your knight on b4 useful, or are you just going to end up moving it back towards the center anyway? Now you could make the argument here that it is kind of an annoying piece because we're forcing white's knight to go out to a3, which is an even worse square, and white doesn't have an easy way to kind of kick us, mainly because this one is hanging on d3, so it's hard for white to achieve c3 without first preparing it. So you could make an argument that the knight is actually kind of annoying there for white, but if we go back, yeah, I'm usually not a fan of these like one move attacks that aren't really improving our position, especially when we're like not yet developed. But then how did you get to playing f5? Because it sounds like you ruled out knight b4.
Right. So the couple of options that I was thinking about after that are, I looked then at playing bishop to g4. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, I feel like my white bishop is my good bishop because I've got this pawn chain on black squares. I'm not sure I want to trade away my good bishop. It's not pinning anything if I play my bishop out. Mm-hmm. So the only bishop move that made any sense to me would have been e6.
Sure.
And that felt a little passive to me. It was an improvement. But that advance f5, opening up the center, I thought, I have this in my pocket to be played sooner or later. And the later I play it, the worse it is, because I feel like if I could play it before he castles, we're both in the center. But if I played it after he castles, then I'm in the center because of his silliness in the beginning. I'm not going to be able to castle away. I'm going to lose the option to play this if I don't play it soon.
Of f5, I see.
Yes.
Okay, well, actually, one thing we should go back a bit. I should correct myself. So I said, like, this decision, knight f5, to give the piece back, gets you into this endgame, but technically we are down a pawn once we go into the endgame. Now you have some compensation because you have like good development, but we have to be clear that this was a this is a big concession. To go into an endgame like down material versus trying to, fight in that maybe somewhat messy position. That said, okay, once we're here, you have a lot of decent moves. I do like bishop e6 more than bishop g4, because on bishop g4, like you said, we don't necessarily want to trade on f3, especially if white plays a move like knight d2 at some point and then just strengthens the knight. Or white can go like bishop e3, and yeah, not super worried about these doubled pawns because white is always able to trade this one off with f4 almost whenever they want to. So I do like the bishop on e6 here. I think this is just a good piece for you. Probably the move I would have started with is rook g8. And the reason I like this kind of move is, okay, obviously we're attacking the pawn on g2, and white doesn't have like a super comfortable way of defending this one. Because if they castle, they always have to worry about like bishop h3, which is annoying, but bishop g4 now actually comes with a real threat as well. But bishop h3 is already annoying on its own. And then something like knight e1 might be forced to defend the g-pawn, and you can either come in with your knight, like knight to d4, or you could castle, for example. Oh no, you already moved the king, so you can't castle, but you can play a move like king d7 and bring the other rook in and play for the g-file attack. So you have a very clear kind of target and plan there. So that's going to look scary to a lot of players. I imagine they might not want to do that one, but every move they can make to defend the pawn comes with some kind of drawback. Like g3 weakens the light squares, you can plant your bishop on h3, and now in addition to stopping white from castling, you're also threatening the bishop coming into g2, which is an unpleasant threat. If they go rook g1, then they give up their rights to castle, and again, bishop g4 actually comes with a threat to take on f3. If they go king f1, again, same thing. They give up the right to castle, and more importantly, the rook on h1 now feels stuck.
Trapped. Yeah.
Yeah. So this one move, rook g8, it just gives white kind of an awkward choice. And then you see how they react. For you, the rook wants to be on g8 because it's the open file, and it's the only square that really makes sense. And then you see how white reacts, and then you can decide, because maybe they go g3 and your bishop has this like amazing square on h3, and yeah, much better than putting it on e6 or playing f5. Okay, so f5 though, actually I think the move is quite interesting on its own. Again, I just wanted to hear like the thought process behind it.
Diagnose me.
Yeah, well, let's keep going. h6. What's the idea behind this one?
So I think the goal of that was to stop knight to g5, which I realized he might have done the previous move. After f5 was on the board, I thought, oh, I'm glad he didn't play knight g5. Now I get another chance to prevent that.
But why is this one so scary? Let's say he played it on the last move. What exactly is the threat?
Well, I did know that I wanted to get my rook on the g file eventually, and if he had played knight g5 now, I couldn't just do that natural move because I'd be leaving my pawn on the h file hanging.
I gotcha. I mean, you could go rook g8 because you're hitting g2, but I understand this was your issue. So you absolutely could go for this one. Your rook.
It would have been a trade.
It's a trade, but if we look at like kind of like the resulting pieces, your rook is super active on the second rank, and white's knight on h7 is kind of stranded. Like it's just out here on its own.
It's a trade I should have wanted.
Yeah, no, I think you're very happy here because you activate one of your strongest pieces, and white goes kind of like pawn hunting, because it's really not about the pawn so much. It's more about just getting your rook to a really fantastic square where now it's going to be attacking everything in white's position. And again, you have your usual kind of counterplay ideas of knight coming into d4, which is now a very strong threat as the knight just hits so many squares. So yeah, this feels like you were kind of afraid of a ghost again. Because if we just look at the position, now white is just attacking with the one piece. I mean, of course, you could also go h6 here and just kick the knight. Maybe this is actually the more salient point because you're not always going to see the tactics like, okay, rook g8, you hang the pawn, but you win the pawn back. This kind of stuff you really have to be on high alert for. But after h6, I don't see what white does other than just go backwards. So this should be satisfying to you as like a simple solution, you know, to the issue of knight g5. You just kick it, and then you win the tempo.
Good point.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I follow that. I think I just needed to note that there was no forward move that the knight could play from here. I've still got my bishop on c8, so the knight can't park at e6. It would have been very easy to calculate that this shouldn't be a threat because I still have h6.
Yeah. The other thing I often think about is like when I'm trying to decide if the opponent has a threat or not, I often try to give them an extra move. Because I think what a lot of players fall into is this trap of like, you know, you calculate knight g5 and then you see that your preferred move, rook to g8, is not working. Again, let's just say you don't see that you can take the g pawn. You just see that, well, you lose the h pawn and that's not good. And then you kind of say, well, I have to be worried about knight g5. But the truth is, of course, we're not committed to rook g8. We can make any number of moves. And so what I would start with here, before I look at any moves like rook g8 or h6, I just ask the question like, what's my opponent's next move? And I think this is actually something, this maybe might be one of the main takeaways I would give to you from the lesson, is to try to incorporate this question frequently when you're playing. People can phrase it differently. A lot of people ask like, what is my opponent's threat? But they're not always threatening something. So I would just ask, what is my opponent's next move? So this is in our, I guess, in our visualization sometimes. And here, if we just ask like, yeah, what is white's next move? They don't really have one. Like the knight doesn't have any squares. They're just going to develop something. And if they don't have any threats, well, that means we can basically do whatever we want. You know, we can develop the bishop, we can move the king. We should be fine. And then once you get here, you figured out what to do. Yeah.
I take your point. Applying that right now, I think I might have been worried EF, and then the knight has perhaps a nice outpost on E6. But of course, he takes F, I just take back with my bishop.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, we're okay. So I guess the further part to this is, well, once you see that your opponent does have some threat that you have to deal with, well, then your job becomes much easier because you kind of know what to focus on and what to defend against. And then you can kind of start calculating. So they want to play this move, so maybe I'll try this first, and you kind of try to work it out. But I think this is a very common mistake, which is why I wanted to just pause here, because this move h6 definitely strikes me as being ultra slow, because we still have a very sharp position and we're down a pawn here. So if we don't try to get some activity and white is able to just develop everything, at a certain point they'll be up a pawn. It's not life-threatening, but it can be considered a pretty significant advantage. So I think you played f4 here at some point. I would have just done this move right away. I think it's a very good move, but I think being more aggressive was the way to go here. But now actually let's talk about f4, because white played c3, you played f4 here. And what was the idea behind this one?
I wanted to prevent development of the black bishop. I also wanted to try and lock white's undeveloped queenside pieces out. This was starting to look to me kind of like a King's Indian defense, where I could maybe bring a lot of my pieces down and attack the king and take advantage of white's lack of development.
Cool. Yeah, that's an important it's an important point. Yeah, now you recognize you have like the King's Indian structure, and your job is on, or your plan is on the king side. Cool. Yeah, I like f4 a lot because I mean it's a very similar move to h6, in the sense that it's a pawn move and it's trying to restrict the opponent's pieces. But here you're restricting a move that white definitely wants to make, bishop e3.
Right.
And you're stopping one of white's next ideas. So now white is kind of backed up. He plays d4. You go back. Absolutely. You just hold on to e5. d5 feels like kind of a mistake to me to open up your bishop like that. Knight e7. Knight h4. And now it's his turn. So he goes knight h4, presumably because he was worried about your knight coming to g6. But you're not committed to knight g6. So his knight on h4 is just sitting there very awkwardly, just like hoping to be useful, where in fact it's like actually a passive piece and a target.
Right.
But now rook h7. So what's rook h7 about?
So I wanted here, I think, to play my knight to g8, so that then I could bring it to f6 and just be bringing it in towards the king.
Okay.
And I didn't want my rook. I wanted my rook on the g file, but putting it on g8 seemed to be blocking in my bishop, or my knight.
So you're just trying to get your rook to g7.
Right. And I figured getting my rook to g7 via the h file would be better than going g8, g7.
But if you want knight g8, why not play knight g8 right now?
If I played knight g8 right now, I was worried about giving white knight f5 or knight g6. I was covering both of those squares with my knight. And until I had... Yeah, I think I was more worried about knight to g6.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Because I think I did see that I could just trade off, if I needed to, my bishop on c8. If I have my rook on the g file between the rook and the bishop, I'm covering both of the squares that my knight was covering. So I thought I don't want to move my knight to g8 until I've got my rook on the g file.
Okay, I got you. Well, let's just take a look at this position here. What happens from here? What would you play?
As white?
As black after I don't know if you can see it, but my last move is knight g6.
Got it. I just had to click on the notation. So yeah. From here, I don't immediately see a problem with just doing the same moves in a different order. I feel like I could just do rook to h7, then
rook h7,
rook to g7.
Yeah, absolutely. And then how would you evaluate things here?
This seems fine. There isn't a specific knight move that's a problem. I assume I'm just giving white time to develop.
Yeah, white will probably develop, and let's just say some move like knight d2. We probably go rook g7 at some point to chase the knight away. And white would have to go back, like knight h4, because they just, all the squares are covered. And then you can continue with your plan. Knight f6, you got your rook on the g file, and well, I mean, you're continuing your plan, so everything is fine. But let's compare the two lines, right? Because in one case we we start with rook h7. White played b4. Not a great move, but they got time to do this. Then we play rook g7, and then if we want to get knight g8, knight f6, we still need like 2 more moves. Whereas in this line, if we, let's say, start with this one, yes, white gets this tempo knight g6, but then you're going to win it back. And this is not a useful tempo at all for white, because actually the knight is just going to have to go back to h4. So this is like one of those one move attacks that, not that it doesn't help white's position, it actually hurts white's position, because they're losing time. They're just like attacking your rook for one move, helping you bring your rook to where it wants to go, the g file. And then they're going to lose another tempo when your rook does get to g7, because then they're going to have to move the knight back to h4. So yeah, as black, we welcome this, because we got so many free moves here to get the setup that we wanted.
Right. The knight move and the knight move back are free tempo.
Yeah, that's just 2 moves, and you got your rook to g7 for free, essentially. Now, I think actually your knight on e7 is okay for the moment. I would have again started with rook g8 here, because this is going to be your more flexible move, in the sense that, okay, you can still play rook g7 if you want to bring the knight to g8, but you also have maybe rook to g4, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Which might be better just because it comes with an attack against white's knight. But I think the bigger point is not the idea that you chose so much as just kind of like the execution. Because to me it feels like, yeah, you're kind of worried about this knight g6 tempo, but the threat doesn't seem dangerous at all. Do you think it's, again, like related to just feeling intimidated by the opponent?
Yeah, I think so. Especially knowing that we were going to be going over this game probably.
All right. Yeah.
I think I was seeing more ghosts than I'm used to.
Gotcha. But things actually turned out very well, like b4, rook g7, c4, and then did you find this one quickly?
No. I found it, I would say, kind of like middling speed.
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised when I found this, because I was like, oh, this opponent who I've been so scared of, who's higher rated than I've ever played before, I think he blundered.
Right.
Yeah, he definitely blundered. I can't believe it. But I spent a while again trying to convince myself, okay, these moves that he's playing don't make sense to me. I feel like I'm really developing a threat towards his king. I'm sure he must see that. How is what he's doing faster? Is he trying to trap my bishop? So at first I was thinking through some lines where I would be playing a6 and retreating away, like I had been doing from this pawn storm with my knight and bishop for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But I did check, okay, well, is there anything wrong with going to the other side of his pawns? I looked at e3 first, then I was like, well, hang on a second. Obviously d4. Probably took me minute and a half to find this.
Okay. And then, well, once you found it, then it's like the veil was lifted, and like, oh, maybe my opponent doesn't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I'm very, very happy this worked out, because it hopefully will give you more confidence for the future, because right, people will make mistakes, and I mean I actually think like you have a very like solid sense of gameplay, like you're fighting for the center, and it seems like you're always trying to follow some kind of concrete plan, like trying to improve your position. I don't think I've seen any like random pawn moves from you so far, like a b4. This is what I would consider a random pawn move. If you were playing white and you play this move, we would definitely talk about it, because it's like, why are you doing this when most of your pieces are on the back rank? I mean, it's not great strategy. So I don't see a lot of this from you. So I feel like you can beat a lot of high-rated opponents simply just by following your opening principles, following like just this like fundamental opening strategy of playing for the center and developing and castling, and yeah, just accepting the gifts that people give you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's see. Let's just see how this one played out. So you pull the bishop back, knight f3. He takes here, but just seems desperate. King d6. Nice, nice blockade. Do you know this word, blockade?
Yeah, stopping a pawn advance.
Right. Yeah, kings can be good blockaders in the endgame, as long as you can control the blockading square. So if white had like a dark squared bishop, then we would want to be careful in making sure that we can always like we can always defend our king.
Yeah.
Or if they have a knight that could come here, that would be bad too. Yeah.
I spent a while before making that king move. It felt I had some hesitancy to do it, and I had to think through some of that logic of, well, there's really not anything he can do to threaten me here. I just have to be really, really mindful to not let him get knight f5. So my bishop is now maybe overworked, but I think I'm okay with that. Took me a while to make this move.
Gotcha. Oh no, it's a very decent move. Let's see, one trick that I just wanted to point out that you can often look for in these kinds of positions when you're like putting pressure on pins like this is you can consider this move, bishop takes g2, and then if knight g2, you have this idea with f3 where you're winning back the piece and your rook is going to get in very actively.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, this is a good trick to know, especially when you're dealing with like a pinned piece and you're putting pressure. It's like you're trading an attacker for a defender, with the idea that you're going to be able to bring more attackers into the party. Because if you started with f3 here, then white would have g3, and I mean you're still doing great, but white is at least holding on. That said, we should point out bishop takes g2, not the best move because it does allow knight f5 check, which we have to be really careful about. So it doesn't work in this position, but just an idea to, just a nice tactic to keep in mind. Okay, so king went back, bishop d7 here. And bishop f2, yeah, just going after this terrible knight, trading off. That was it.
Yeah.
Nice.
I was worried I blundered with that en passant capture. But I was ahead enough that it seemed like I would find a way to convert.
Yeah, why would this be bad?
It blocked off my battery. I was worried that if he just played king g2, that maybe I had a forced mate already, and this capture, I now delayed myself 5-6 moves, gave him some more chances while I had to bring my rooks back over to the c file, find something else.
Oh, I see. I mean, that's not a big deal. Like delaying the game a couple of moves, as long as you don't give any actual chances to come back in, meaning you give back your bishop or you allow white to promote some pawns. I mean, here you're up a lot of material, rook and bishop, so it's really, it would take a lot for you to not win this game at this point. I don't know. I think it's fine. I don't see how you're going to break through on the g file after g4 otherwise. So no, it looks absolutely fine. And then yeah, you do have to switch your rooks around, but I mean that's no problem. Rooks are very mobile for a reason. So
we haven't talked about the clock at all.
Yeah.
I think at this point in the game, it was a 30 plus 20. And at this point in the game, I was down to about 4 or 5 minutes, and my opponent still had above 20.
Fantastic.
I'm surprised that you said that.
No, it is good. It is actually, that is good time management because at this point, I know yeah, you don't have a ton of experience, but you do have a completely winning position.
Hmm.
As long as you leave yourself with some time to finish the game, you're in good shape. I mean, it's a balance because you do want to spend time as much as you can without falling into time trouble. Because the more time you spend, presumably the more ideas you can come up with during the game. Um, so playing quickly, I think, is not an advantage. Definitely not in classical chess. Um, Now, if you were down to, let's say, 4 minutes early on, like at this point, like that would be a problem because there's still a lot of chess to be played, and now you don't have time. But if you have a winning position, um, as they would say, you can win this position by hand, which means that like all it takes is to just not hang anything and slowly promote one of your pawns. So let's say the most straightforward plan would be to just pick up this pawn and then start bringing your rooks over to the c file, and then maybe one day forcing a trade of rooks, and then you can just promote your pawn, make a queen, set up an easy checkmate. If you have any kind of increment, even like 5 second increment, 2 second increment, I think this is enough to just like comfortably finish out the game. Maybe 2 seconds is a bit fast, but if you're playing like 30 plus 20, then the 20-second increment should certainly be enough.
Okay. Yeah, I could live on the increment uh, comfortably here. That makes sense.
Right. So it's kind of a balance as long as the position can be handled. If it's a really complicated situation, then the time is a factor because, yeah, you simply just don't have time to think about different ideas and you're very likely to make a mistake. But at this point, I would simply consider the game to be nearly over. And so it's good that you used up a lot of your time. Whereas your opponent has 20 minutes on their clock, with a completely losing position, like nothing to do with that 20 minutes. It like doesn't help them. It doesn't help them at all.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Um, so, well, I know you're kind of new to classical, so it's good that you're spending your time. I mean, really good. Most players they start a 30-minute game, but then they still play blitz, so they're still done quickly. So that's kind of, yeah, defeating the purpose. But let's talk about your chess. Let's do the official diagnosis. I guess this is the key part of the show.
Yeah.
Um, well, I mean, in terms of all the general advice, I think that would definitely apply to you, meaning like you should be trying to play games against opponents that are around your rating or slightly higher. Anywhere like 100, 200 points higher is totally fair game, and you can be really competitive with this level of player. Playing slower games is going to be good for your overall development because it gives you time to think about what moves you want to play, think about the middle game, what your opponent might be threatening, what your tactics are, all these different things. The more time you have on your clock, the more time it gives you to think through them and reflect on them. In some positions, you'll figure out some ideas are working. In other positions, you'll see some ideas are not working. And as you get better and better at chess, your skill of deciding, which ideas are working, which ideas are not working, will get better and better um, uh, while that happens. So you definitely want to be playing a lot of like slow chess and then reviewing the games, as it sounds like you've been doing, because I mean um, I know you're at least checking the games like with the computer afterwards and trying to see like what your mistakes are. I think this is just a really good starting point. Um, and then I think you should be doing the typical things of like, watching videos, watching commentary, trying to follow high level players and trying to follow their thought process. And then of course like solving puzzles and working on your uh, tactical skills. That's something that we haven't really talked about a lot, but you mentioned you do some puzzles every day. Did you say you're mainly working with CT art, or do you do like the online trainers?
So lately I've been doing exclusively CT art. I was doing chess.com puzzles of the day and Chess puzzles. Um, my Chess puzzle rating is significantly higher than my my play is.
Hmm.
Um, so I took that to be a sign that tactically, with enough time, I can figure out, an 1800 rated puzzle. I kind of assumed that their ratings were related.
Unfortunately, no. Actually, puzzles are
Okay.
kind of infamously inflated
Mhm.
because it's like, well, anyone can do a bunch of puzzles and go up. So it's not like a rating pool in the sense
Okay.
that yeah, like when you win a game, someone else goes down and things kind of balance out. So the puzzle strength does correlate to rating, but it can be anywhere from like plus 300 to like plus 700. It can
Okay.
really vary a lot. Yeah. So the fact that your puzzle rating is higher than your actual rating, I would say, is pretty on par.
Okay.
So yeah, I really like CT Art as an app. I think that one I mentioned before is just very good for like learning tactical motifs and tactical themes, and then being able to see them in like different types of positions. I do think that the app will be pretty challenging for you in the sense that some of the puzzles will go up all the way to like 2400 range.
Mm.
And but the way I would suggest you to work through it is to go section by section, because the puzzles are arranged in kind of like in terms of their level.
Okay.
And
I've been
so,
playing it randomly.
oh, okay, you can do it random as well. I actually like doing it section by section just because I think that's what builds the pattern recognition, is seeing like a decoy 10 different times in like 10 different variations.
Mm.
Um,
Okay.
and
I'll
the
do it that
puzzles
way.
will slowly progress in difficulty in the section. So what I would suggest doing is solving the first ones. I think they're going to be totally doable, probably pretty easy. And then once it gets to be too complicated, or like you get it wrong and then you get it wrong a couple of times and then it shows you the solution, and then you don't even comprehend the solution. So if it ever gets to that level, then just go on to the next section and start from the first problems there.
Okay. That's a good plan.
Yeah, and then what I would suggest doing is once you go through everything, and let's say you've done an average of like 10 or 12 problems in each section, just start from the top, solve the first ones again, because it's been a while and it's good to repeat patterns even if it's the exact same position.
Mm.
And then just try to go a little bit further this time. Instead of 12 problems, try to do like 15 or as many as you can go again until you get to that point where you feel like, okay, this is just way above my level.
Gotcha.
Um, let's see. I think. Oh yeah, during the stream you mentioned this book, Soviet Chess Primer. I think that's definitely a great book to kind of slowly like start working through. I think you can make a ton of progress honestly without books, just by like playing a lot and solving a lot of tactics, because most of your games will be decided kind of in the on the tactical side, where like stuff is hanging, and whoever can find more accurate moves during the sharp phase of the game will probably win, regardless of what happened in the opening and early middle game. Um, but if you really want to take it, like kick it up a notch and take it to the next level, and maybe even one day like play like over the board and stuff, then the chess books just have like a wealth of knowledge. And so that's a really good one that we mentioned earlier, Soviet Chess Primer. I think that has like it actually starts with the rules, so I would suggest for you to skip. I would skip the first section.
Mhm.
It's actually really interesting that they included that. It makes sense to include. It is supposed to be a book for beginners, but it goes into like such. I'm not sure if I would call it advanced, but it's like intermediate advanced stuff that it's like, yeah, a lot of the material is useful up to players of higher levels, because they'll talk about like strategy and how to calculate variations, how to look for combinations, how to come up with a plan out of the opening, how to orient yourself in the end game and what kind of plans to look for. So it basically gives you a very nice like overall picture of the game and the different types of strategies that you should be looking for, whether you're in the opening, middle game, end game. And then also gives you like there's a bunch of tactics in there, a bunch of combinations, so it's good for your like overall solving as well. So overall, great book. And if you just kind of like slowly work through that one, I think that would be I think that would be really good. And so
Excellent.
then last thing for you, I guess this is the only thing I really picked up on from your games, is yeah, just this idea of like seeing ghosts from the opponent, maybe giving your opponents a little bit too much respect in terms of their threats. So I'd encourage you to really try to be concrete and not back down. So what that means is like if you have a choice between making a passive move and making an active move, try to go for the active one. If you're worried about one of your opponent's moves, really try to investigate if that's a threat you have to deal with. And if it is, then by all means defend against it. But if it's not, then in most cases you're going to be better off doing something active and useful for your position, regardless of what the opponent is doing.
I like that. It is always much easier to figure out, I can justify this move. It defends against some attack, than to dismiss an attack and go, okay, what should I be doing instead? Let me find a better move now that I've dismissed it.
Right. Exactly. As you mentioned, this point that Danya made that I think is really useful. If the opponent is doing something aimless and it has no threat, then yeah, just follow your plan. So the typical thought process is you see what their move is. Like we can go back to this kind of critical moment. Knight h4. You take a quick second to try to figure out like, okay, what's the idea here? What's the next move? What's their threat? If you see something, then you try to evaluate, well, is that an actual threat or is that just kind of like a loss of time helping us do what we want to do anyway? Is it actually going to lead to anything concrete? And if not, then yeah, just continue your plan. Try to find, the most direct move in the position and basically stick to the fundamentals. And
Excellent. Thank you.
yeah, no, I hope it helps. Because I feel like you got a ton of potential, and there will be tricks and traps that people throw at you, especially while Eric Rosen is still streaming.
Yeah, thankfully no one's done the Stafford Gambit to me yet, but
yeah, like I feel like he single-handedly like affects Google Trends for chess openings. Yeah. But I mean, chess is a game, where you learn in the long run. So like, yeah, you get caught with something. It's like, it's not a big deal. You just learn from it and then you learn to avoid it next time. If anything, it's more useful for you in the long run than always trying to kind of play super prophylactically. So I'd encourage you to be more active overall.
Yeah, I'm hoping my enthusiasm for trying to pick up the King's Indian defense is I have worried that my play style lacks trying to find checkmates in the middle game. I almost only win games once we get to an end game, and either I promote or I find a king a mating net. And just trying to expose myself to be aggressive if you have an advantage in the earlier mid game. That's getting outside of my comfort zone. So that's where I've been trying to focus.
Very cool. No, I like that approach. I think that's a great idea. King's Indian, I think, is a nice flexible opening that will definitely put you in that situation where you kind of have to play for the attack. So that's a good plan. Well, all right, Post, this was great. Hopefully this was useful for you.
Oh, very much. Thank you, Kostya.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Hopefully it was useful for folks watching out there as well. And so the idea is to check in, in like a couple months. We'll do another quick, I guess, interview style type of thing and see where you're at. So
wonderful. I look forward to it.
Hopefully that puts some pressure on you to work. That's the other part of the show, is that you make this like public announcement that you're like working on your chess, and then we're gonna follow up.
In order to put my nose to the grindstone, what do you think I should be able to accomplish in, say, 2 months of meaningful study? what measure would you try and hold me to? I don't know
Uh,
if that's part of the format.
no, that's a good question. So yeah, I definitely don't care about your rating. So if we come back in 2 months and like you're still 1500, that's absolutely fine because it does take. You're gonna have ups and downs. You might go up to 1700 and then like drop back down. All kinds of things might be happening because chess is such a like rich and complex game that you might be doing some things right and then neglecting one thing, and then you focus on that thing that becomes a strong suit, and all of a sudden you're losing all your games in the end game. It's like
Hmm.
all kinds of things can happen. Well, I mean, usually if we look at your games, I think we'll be able to kind of maybe tell if you're still doing more of the same stuff or if you've kind of like progressed a bit. But in terms of like a quantitative measure, um, well, let's see. Well, one measure would be how far you get into the book.
Hmm. That's a good one.
So we'll check in on that, and then how much progress you make in the app because it tracks your percentage.
I love it.
Great. So that's what we'll track.
Excellent. Thank you for keeping me honest there, Kostya.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks all you guys for watching, and catch y'all next time.